Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In today's show, you'll hear Alberto Nunez chatting with Brian Miner all about all the things that a first-time competitor needs to know. Brian is not a stranger to this show as he appeared recently in episode 109 with Eric, and Alberto is going to introduce him a bit more when this recording starts, so I'm going to go ahead and let him do that. But if you're an athlete who is considering your first competition, a new-ish competitor looking to do it better next time, or a coach who wants to be in a better position to help your own first-time athletes, you got to stick around and hear these guys talk shop. So here is what first-time bodybuilders need to know with Alberto Nunez and Brian Miner.
What's up, guys? So today we got a special guest for you, Brian Miner, who's been on the podcast. Not you, you've been on the podcast.
I have.
We just went over this.
Double dipped.
Okay, so it was, what was it?
AO.
Okay. So a lot of our people are familiar with Brian, and he's well-versed when it comes to, both the powerlifting and the physique athlete side of things, and we thought it'd be, inspiration for this is that we both have a mutual friend who competed in November at WNBF Worlds, our boy James, right?
James Brockmeyer.
And we got to see James morph, basically go from the James that we know into shredded James, but a lot of things came with that. And as much as, you can prep a first-time athlete for that, there's just a few things that you have to experience. Mm-hmm. And, obviously a good coach kind of gets you ready for that. But nevertheless, it was a trip, man. It was a trip. It was not the same old James.
Yeah. No, James is he handled it, all things considered, I think he handled it fantastic.
Yeah. That's the crazy part. He's on the higher end of.
But, all the things that, go along with first-time competitors, experience, he definitely had. But, yeah, it was fun.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, it's like most people have never, starved themselves slowly to that degree.
Yeah.
It's usually people who have the luxury of doing that. They're people who live in a first world country, and they're like, I'm going to starve myself via a high protein diet, and they're just not ready for that. Yeah. I'd say that whenever I do get a noob, a wide-eyed noob, I approach the situation a little bit differently compared to, someone who's seasoned. When you get someone who's brand new, right? How do you assess the situation?
Well, I guess brand new. There's kind of a spectrum there. I mean, there's first time competitors, and then there's first time competitors who have no experience with tracking, or like there's people that come to me that want to prep, and you kind of delay that. Let's get some. Let's build a foundation of habits, beforehand. But, I was fortunate with James because James is, he's very detail-oriented. He had a good, I didn't work with him on nutrition, leading up to this. We worked together on training for powerlifting, but he, had very tight control over, more control than I would probably want someone to have in the off-season. Yeah. Like he's... he had all his boxes checked, and so I knew, compliance wasn't going to be an issue. But, with first-time competitors, I think the biggest thing to get across is, selling them on the timeline, making them understand, that fat loss takes, true contest shape takes a lot longer than most people want to believe. And I think, right now, I think a lot of first-time competitors that are at least, resourceful, in the evidence-based community, whatever you want to call it, they, at this point, understand that. Whereas, you and I, our first shows, I thought, as a natural athlete, I was perma-bulked up to, 235, and I thought I was going to, I was competing in an NPC natural show, and I thought I was going to have to squeeze into the light heavies at 198, and 198 came, and it was like, shit, there's still a ways to go. But, it's getting people, first-time competitors, making them realize that, this is in order to do this right, this is something that you plan, at least a year or more in advance.
That's a real commitment.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, I've always said, people that get into true contest shape or, are really successful at this, more than anything, they're just good at planning. They're just very strategic.
Yeah.
And it's less about, most people can stick to a diet that's, conservative enough in terms of a deficit that, it's not too invasive to the point where they're feeling like they are crash dieting or cheating, needing to do that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing with beginning, first time competitors is getting them to understand the timeline and getting them to understand that, compliance is absolutely essential. And, with tracking, like, I'm not a big proponent of, or I should say, I'm a big proponent of just having the amount of structure that's required to meet the current objective.
Yeah.
So, in the off season, it's like if we can eat more based on hunger and, just have checkpoints, like let's, have, 4 to 5 meals a day, make sure you're getting enough protein, like let's settle in, just let time do its thing. Whereas, with prep, that granular detail is extremely beneficial most of the time, especially at the end. And so, two biggest things, timeline and compliance, I think are the biggest. And then just getting them to, manage their expectations.
But here's one that backtracks a little bit because this goes into expectations and it goes into timeline. So for some people, you have to be like, hey, baby, you get no timeline because you're not doing it this time.
Yeah.
So I'd say that with first time competitors, and to me, this is a hallmark of a coach that cares, Like, often I have to tell them, you know what, this is just not the right situation. Yeah. It's not the right time. We can maybe work on getting you there, but it would be irresponsible for me. And this is something that I see, I think, especially a lot of, like, newer coaches that are just, getting into it and, they'll just take whatever's there. They'll have people prepping who have absolutely no business prepping right now. I think that's important.
Yeah, you have to account. Sometimes you have to protect the athlete from themselves a little bit. And, it goes beyond just, do you have enough time to lose body fat? There's obviously that component where that in itself automatically filters out, a lot of inquiries. But, and then, just getting a, psychological read on somebody and like, is this, deep down in my conscience, do I feel that this is in their best interest? And, maybe I'm wrong, but, most of the time it's, you get a good vibe for if somebody's ready to commit to that process because, anybody who's been through a prep knows how much of a commitment it is. And, it's the main reason that it's like a, every half-decade deal for me is because it's just one of those things I don't want to do. Like, I have no desire to do on a regular basis.
I'd say half my applications are free. Like my admin Melissa will send me an app. She's like, scope this out. What do you think? When can you start her? And I'm like, she's not starting. Or he's not starting. But no, I just had a young lady today that had to turn back because of the same thing. She wants to do a show in March, and it's December. And it's like, you should have told me this like the previous March, right? Yeah. But yeah, I'd say that's huge, is being able to tell a first timer that as excited as you are, like, you don't meet none of the criteria that I would like for you to have before we commit into something that, again, they don't even know what they're necessarily getting into. James, he kind of knew. He saw us compete the year before.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing worth mentioning is he was, he was kind of along for the ride. He was at our last show of the year, so he had a very good idea. He was in an advantaged position over most people.
And there were still some bumps there that, it's like, he didn't expect. So I guess getting into what can you expect as a first-time competitor when it comes to how this is going to impact your life? Like, what are some common things that we see happen?
I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. You know, I think that is worth pointing out first is, you know, somebody who has a family versus, I mean, James is single, in case any ladies out there.
Looker too.
No, but James, it's like he was able to, he could kind of be selfish with his time, you know, and you're more limited by that the more commitments you have, you know, if you have a significant other. But I think it's ignorant to think that it's not at the end of the day, a selfish endeavor, because it is. And so I think you need to be prepared to, you know, I like to tell people, you know, like, let's have a support system, you know, you want your significant other to be, you know, buy into the process. And, you know, it's just about managing expectations. I mean, the big things that are going to be there is, you know, hunger. Don't run from it. Like, you just have to embrace it. Or maybe not embrace, but it should be expected. There's no one ever...
what's kind of like a hard set where you get into those last reps is like you expect that, and that's part of what's going to get you there. It's not comfortable, but you know it's going to happen, right?
And I think, you know, I was just talking to an athlete the other day about this. It's like, you know, the more you focus on trying to combat hunger, the hungrier you tend to be. I mean, it's just it encourages that you know, that food focus. Whereas when you just chalk it up as part of the process, it's just easy to kind of roll off. But I think hunger, how
about body dysmorphia? Because for a lot of people, this is the first time they've seen themselves.
Obviously.
I mean, you prepped this, all that stuff you had seen before, you know, it was cool to see it again, but it wasn't like the first time.
Yeah. No, I think... I mean, going on the way down, there's body dysmorphia on the way down as you're getting into shape too. You know, that can occur. I guess we'll start there. You know, as you continue to get leaner, there's that stage where you're getting leaner, but you're flat at the same time, and you just look like you're just losing muscle, and you're not getting leaner. And so, there's that phase you have to prepare for and power through. But that's why I think a lot of people can't prep themselves. It's like there's that oh shit moment where you start second guessing everything, because, you know, it usually coincides with, you know, strength starting to take a hit in the gym. And you just kind of have to get through that stage. But then coming out of the show, I mean, you have to be prepared for... It's difficult, I guess, for first-time competitors to leave that conditioning behind, and that's assuming that they got into the shape. Like I mean, I didn't get into true contest shape my first prep, but even then it was still extremely difficult. So, and I keep going back to this, but it's about knowing in advance what the objective is, like what the primary focus is, so you don't feel like you don't feel guilt for putting on, you know, body fat.
It's not to have people watch you in the gym. It's not to get the likes on the Instagram. It's you think of it as like your squat if you're a powerlifter. You know, it's one of your many attributes, and it's just that you're specializing on that one. But it needs to be part of the process too, though, because, you know, a good athlete, you know, gives you good feedback. They can tell you, Coach, I've gotten leaner, even though the scale is not necessarily showing that. So it's like, at the same time, it's an advantageous like thing to be consumed with, but it needs to be looked at under that scope.
Yeah, definitely. You need to almost have. I don't know if like a touch of body dysmorphia is like. I mean that's probably accurate. But yeah, you need to be in tune enough.
What did you wake up and do every morning when you were prepping, right?
Check your abs in the mirror.
We got so many pictures from each other. It's ridiculous. But that made us, you know, that was part of what made us successful, I feel.
Yeah. No, as long as you're using it in an objective manner and not like a self-loathing manner, it's useful. But I think that's, you have to understand, like I always kind of go through the checklist. It's like, okay, you know, even, when I'm doing things myself, it's like I see what I see, it registers, and I think, okay, what are the reasons for this? It's like, okay, where am I at in terms of the deficit for the week? Is this, if it's expected and you understand why it's occurring, it makes that emotional response much less invasive, I guess. So in that regard, I think just knowing what to expect and understanding the strategy and understand, a good coach will say, it's, you will look your best, 1 to 2 days after a refeed generally, and then things will progressively get worse. And I guess, like, as an example, even with James, towards the end there, we would have 4 low days and then 3 refeed days. And the, by that 4th low day, when that rolled around, it's like it was something we kind of laugh about at that point. It's like, okay, yeah, you look pretty bad right now, pretty flat. But I think, getting the athlete to the point where they can register that and acknowledge that in conjunction with just simply looking at, rather than just looking in the mirror and thinking like, things are falling apart. Like, okay, things are heading in the right direction. This is expected. So yeah, I think, for any first-time competitor, and this is more the responsibility of the coach, I think just teach them along the way what to expect. There's going to be a phase where you feel like you're looking worse every day. And nobody told me that in my first prep, And so that's why I think a lot of people are in a good position now with the resources available, with as many good coaches as there are, to be able to, navigate those, I guess, sticking points in prep and get through them with, momentum.
See, funny you say that. Personally, my first prep, I didn't get as lean as I could have because that was part of it. It was just a point. I'm like, I'm not big anymore, but I'm not like in the shape that I need to be in, and it completely stopped me. I got to like 180, and that was as far down as I made it. Yeah, and I couldn't bear to let go of anything else from that point. But again, I was making I was being I didn't have a coach my first year, and yeah, I could literally convince myself of 3 different things on the same day. And that's why, it is important for a coach to be the eyes, and it's important for you to, train your athlete to give you the proper feedback. Yes, we want to be semi-obsessive about the details, but, looking at it from that scope is like, this is just our craft and we're trying to perfect it. Like, don't tie it into your self-worth.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting is, teaching the athlete what they should be looking for. One thing, as a first-time competitor, you might not know what, and this is something, since we're talking about James, sort of using him as a case study, he brought up a number of times, like, I don't really know. I said, are you fuller or flatter today? And he's like, I don't know what that means. I've never felt that before. Because when, if you've never gotten really lean, it's like you can be glycogen depleted middle of the off season and not look much different or feel much different. People that are really in tune with it will, but for him, it's like we finally got to a point where he's like, I know what flat is now, and then from there, feedback got that much, more refined and more, useful. It's like I could actually make decisions with his feedback rather than teaching him what to look for. So
usually coaches it's a remote thing, and you're not there, so you really do count on the athlete to be able to, and hopefully a few weeks in they're able to do that for you.
Yeah, definitely.
So far we've gone through things that affect you. I guess when it comes to because you probably did some lifting before you decided to jump into a prep, right? But how it impacts some of those things and how it changes that. But usually I think if you're doing it right, and oddly enough, there's still off-season bodybuilders that have never even got on stage, and they still let it like take over the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But let's just say that's not you. You know, usually, you know, you're just like the meathead within your family, and you just it's just this weird thing you do on the side. What ends up happening is it kind of starts to like take over other portions of your life. You know, and some is expected, right? But it can get to the point where it just becomes way too much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I think any seasoned bodybuilder, they kind of learn to conserve energy, you know, throughout in sort of pick their spots to be consumed by it. Yeah, if you're not careful, it can really take over, you know, every, you know, waking minute of the day. And the thing is, it's to no added benefit.
No.
And, you know, we've talked about this before, but it's like the people that you want to, I think this is important. You want the athlete to buy into the strategy so they're not constantly thinking about the strategy. So I think as a coach, like educating the athlete is extremely important to the point where they feel comfortable enough to just adhere and then let time do its thing, you know? Because I think a lot of times when people are super consumed with it, or overly consumed with it at stages where they probably shouldn't be. Yeah. It's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a result of just not, or they're second guessing, you know, what they should be doing. Yeah. I mean, what do you have to add to that?
I went to a podcast with Mark Bell recently, and we're talking about, you know, Mark's obviously done some things with powerlifting, his business, and just recently bodybuilding. So he kind of understands how grinds go. But he just kind of outsources prep and just, you know, just continued working at a high level with everything else. And one thing we mutually agreed upon was the fact that, you know, before you get to that super sucky point, at least when it comes to, I guess, your responsibilities, and this is going outside of the relationship with your loved ones, like outside of that, there's a point where you're actually, I feel, you're more productive. Yeah. You know, because in order to make time for the prep, you know, if you're a student, you got to make sure your study hours are study hours and not Instagram and study, you know, and for me, it meant I had to wake up early to get my day rolling so that I could get my cardio out the way and do everything else that I needed to do on top of the contest prep. So if you do it right, if anything.
Yeah, it can enhance productivity. Yeah. And I think a lot of people expect as soon as they enter a deficit, they're going to go brain dead. Yeah. And that's not the case. And like you said, if you do it right, it can be a really good opportunity to structure your time and build good habits that you can then take with you, you know, coming off of prep. And then another thing, and this is, you know, something I noticed my very first prep is if you're somebody if you're trying to further your professional career, or say there's something you're trying to learn about, it's like cardio provides a golden opportunity to do that. You know, if you podcasts, you know, it's like you find that you're continuing ed, that time is multiplied when you're in a prep. It's something you don't necessarily think about as much when you're in the off season and you have a little bit more leeway. And you have a little bit more leeway. But yeah, you're right. I think it can, you know, even towards the end, like you may cognitively be taking a hit, but even then, it's almost like your refined schedule sort of offsets that. So, that's absolutely true. Is, you know, you learn to prioritize, and that's another thing. Is you want to have an athlete that's mature enough to manage their time. You know, it's an exercise that will force you to improve your time management skills, but if you have no time management skills to begin with, it's going to be a struggle. And you know, and that's even, you know, unless you're doing tons of cardio, it shouldn't take, you know, early in a prep, it shouldn't it shouldn't take any more time than it does in the off season, really. I mean, you may be doing, 20 minutes extra a day of cardio. But it's an extension of what you've already been doing. It's like you're changing the way you eat, but you're still eating. You're still training. Actually, for me and for James, we both, spent time powerlifting in the off season, and so when I kind of went to and decided to prep, like I sort of rearranged my schedule, my training, and when you're programming specifically for just development and more, you're using more submaximal intensities just on average. Things just don't take as long.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in many aspects, it's like my training didn't take as long. And so out of the gate, it didn't take much more time. But then, is basically cardio is like the wild card there.
And even then it comes in increments. It's not, it shouldn't, slowly gets worked into the prep.
And that's another thing. I mean, when you use, and this is kind of going on a tangent, but you and I both tracked steps is a way to, quantify cardio expenditure. And, I think a lot of people like that sort of neatly packaged, this is my allotted block of cardio, this is my 400 calories that I burn here. But it really does ignore like the big picture for the day. And so I would argue, even though it's not giving you, a caloric number, it's still probably at the end of the day a more accurate way to steer your expenditure. But when you're doing it that way, it's like you can. I found myself just being like intentionally being a little less efficient in certain areas.
Absolutely, because it was getting good.
So if I knew I was going to the grocery store, it's like I would just park a little further away. Things like that, and things to kind of sneak that cardio in without it psychologically being assigned, categorized in my head like this is cardio. I'd take my kid on a walk, and things like that, and play with him on the playground, and all of that stuff, by the end of the day, it's like it adds up more than you think. But it still does, at the end of prep, for most people, they're going to be doing a decent amount of cardio that's going to be a noticeable time investment, and in those cases it's like your schedule just has to accommodate that, and I guess any cognitively demanding task, depending on the person, you may want to allocate some more time to.
I feel personally that when I am prepping, and I talked to Ben about this a few years back, He told me that it would not be out of the question that people get smarter when you starve them long enough, because as a human being, what is like your one weapon to feed you? It's disappear. And I feel like I'm personally, luckily for me, like this is kind of embedded into like what I do for a living now. So like, things that are related to bodybuilding, like they would be floating through my mind. I'm like, let me write about this, right? But even before that, I remember that you can sit there and like tell yourself how hungry you are and what you're craving, or you can just get lost in a task that just requires your undivided attention. And I feel that personally, like I'm just sharper. I think emotional intelligence goes down sometimes. But
that, yes. No, I would agree with that. I've never felt. Granted, I've also had the luxury of, this last prep of being self-employed. And I've heard stories, of like people getting written up during prep because their work suffers, but for the most part, I think it's probably overplayed a bit, and that's one thing. Maybe don't convince yourself that that's an expectation. Like it may not happen to you, so don't assume that it will. It's like one of those things that, whatever you assume will happen generally will. So that's something to probably be careful with.
if you do it right, I straight up feel that, and you're not like a hermit during your prep, and you make it a point to stay on top of everything else. At least the things that don't require necessarily emotional intelligence, you tend to be sharper. If you're responsible, you're going to make it so that your bodybuilding fits in with the rest of your life and not the other way around. But let's get into that part. I guess the one that involves not necessarily whether it be your student or your professional life, but our relationships, right? And what can you expect there? And sometimes even your personal relationship with yourself. I think that one's an important one that isn't talked about.
Yeah. It's going to drastically depend on your spouse, obviously, how patient they are.
If you do have
but I mean, that's at the end of the day, like, you're going to... This is a goal that's going to be at the forefront of your mind all the time, and in that regard, you have to remind yourself that, like, they're along for the ride because you asked them to be, and I guess for me, it's like I would try, sometimes would fail, but it's like you want to try to still maintain the same habits you had, heading into that.
Even if you have to make them a little automated, where it's like I schedule my roses to be delivered.
One thing I feel like I've done okay. I mean, I've never been like terribly food focused during prep. I mean, obviously to some degree, but it's never bothered me being around food that I couldn't eat, you know? And so, doing things like, picking up food for your spouse, one of the things that, my wife and I would do a lot of before prep is like we would prepare dinner together, so immediately that's kind of, it's like she's not going to be preparing the same food as me, and it's a different experience, when you're weighing things and, they're, it's a habit that wasn't in place or a practice that wasn't in place prior to that. So it's like you want to be able to make up for that in some way, make them dinner and, just be mindful of the fact that they are making a sacrifice. And not that, I'm by no means perfect at all in that regard, but I think, it goes a long way just acknowledging that that's something, just in addition to cardio, just in addition to your diet, like it's a checkpoint throughout the day that you just need to stay on top of. And that's going to help you in the long run. It's like you don't want your relationship to be burned out before the end of prep, you want it to be, keeping up with the pace of prep and communicating with your significant other or your friends, where you're at in that process. I mean, we have a lot of friends here in Fort Collins that, for a while there, you and I kind of went, MIA on the bar scene. It's like we would go and, after a while, it's like, okay, people understood, like, this is sort of the end of the road for this particular social outlet. And so the burden is on you then to come up with new ways to fulfill that.
Calling all 2019 physique athletes. If you would like 3D Muscle Journey to be your coaching service, please do us and yourselves a favor and sign up now at 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching. If you've been a listener of the show for any amount of time, you know that we do not take prep lightly, we do not like to rush things, and we will actually turn people away if their timeline is unreasonable or unsafe. That being said, since it's already halfway through January, waiting much longer would not be advised, especially since you honestly can't ever start working with your coach too early, right? So if you're considering competing in bodybuilding, female physique, figure, male physique, bikini, fit body, or any other division that requires you to be as jacked and shredded as possible, please hit us up as soon as possible at 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching. That's 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching.
yeah, we have to find other ways to keep up with our powerlifting buddies. Is you know, they diet, but it's a little bit, and not to that extent where it can impact your social life.
It's like I gotta switch to liquor instead of beer.
It was a process, and then it just got to the point where
that's like the
I need to sleep, man. I'd rather get my sleep in than
It's like switching from steak to fish.
Yeah. But yeah, it's I think one thing that has helped me in that area is to, especially certain people, give them the open door policy. Like, if I'm messing up, let me know. Like, and if you let them know ahead, it's like they cut your break sometimes because you kind of know sometimes
they know you're trying.
But like leaving it like that, and I think I don't know. It's something where maybe my first few preps when I was kind of getting to the point where you just get in survival mode. So it's kind of like the logistical stuff, it gets sharper, but the emotional stuff, like it's
you're just
that
a little bit numb.
You're kind of like I remember my dogs coming up to me like I was like busy doing work, and usually they'll like come and they'll poke me and they just want to play. They have something in their mouth. I'm like, all right, I'll take 5 minutes to go play. And it was getting to the point where like it would like I'd catch myself being annoyed. Like I just played with you 30 minutes ago, you know. So your fuse gets shorter.
Yeah, and I mean I think the physical activity aspect. It's biologically driven, you know. It's like you're conserving energy. So I think some of that is just so you can catch yourself, but I think some of that, in a sense, like that acute response out of the gate, some of that's probably outside your control. But at the same time, how you your actions outside of that are still completely within your control. It's like sometimes you do have to fake it. You know, you have to fake, the way you feel, and to the point where you're easy to get along with, and I think that's something some people.
Did he have to fake orgasms?
I don't know. Let's get him live.
Which is something
probably.
Hey, how old is James?
27, 28.
Okay. So it's something when you're 27, you can't even fathom how that works. But he got a little bit of that, and that was disruptive. You know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, James was somebody who, like, I think is. I wish I had like a hidden camera because he came out and visited. It was probably 2 months before his show, I'd say. And by then, it's like when you don't really know what to expect, like you don't start fending off that. Like you're not as self-aware of it.
You know what to look for.
I like once you go through it a couple times. So it's like with first-time competitors, you kind of see those social effects a bit sooner in the process.
See, and that's why you got to count on someone to tell you where you're messing up. Someone that knows you pretty well, because sometimes you don't know until it's too late. You know.
But he was, you could tell. He was a bit slower, just verbally, and I remember he had to call PayPal to sort out like some PayPal issue he was having, and I could hear the guy through his phone, and he was being super polite. And James, I remember, like, I called him out on it, like, afterwards, like, dude, like, you were a dick to that guy, and like, we kind of laughed it off. But yeah, your fuse is a bit shorter. He spent, I think, I think the food focus, is especially, same thing with the social aspect. Like, you don't really know until you know. I think he spent 45 minutes making some just add water soup in our like I took a nap. He told me he was making some soup. I took a nap. I just like dozed off on my couch, and when I woke up he was still making this soup. I was like, "What'd you make?" And he's like, "Oh, that soup." And, I thought maybe he had made it from scratch, but yeah, it's like just like absorbed in the moment.
But we know now, it's like my food prep is so much. Like I try to spend even less time when I'm dieting now because I don't want to go down that road.
Yeah, and I don't even think for me it's it's that. I think it's just it's almost like I have so many other things on my plate that I just don't really have time to like fantasize about food. You know, it's like when I know I'm going down that route is when I start like preferring egg whites over like a shake, you know.
For me, is when I buy stuff that makes no sense to buy. It's like that makes no sense, like per dollar.
I had that like the Icon Meals popcorn. But yeah, you know, for the most part, even in the off season, it's like I don't eat a ton of. I mean, I enjoy steak, like I enjoy meat, but I just hate preparing it. You know, so I'm pretty simple. You know, I have probably at least half of my protein is from whey, and when I notice I start like cutting that out to make room for, you know, something I can chew, that's when I know things are bad. But yeah, other than that, it's like I'm not. It's like avoid the temptation to, you know, make 15 ingredient meals.
Or trying to like not be hungry. I think that's a huge one. You know, it's like actively you can only be full. You know, like that's not you're never gonna find actual fullness. So
no, you're not. I mean, you're still gonna be. You're still going to be hungry even if your stomach is full. The signal is not going to be quenched.
Well, and this is how I see it. It's like there's a difference between a meal that, you know, it's like, man, that's going to zap, and in an hour I'm going to feel like low energy again. Mm-hmm. And that's I try to aim for food or meals that, you know, it's like, okay, this will make me effective the next 3 hours, as opposed to like I want to feel bloated and kind of terrible because it's better than hunger, you know?
No, that's a good point. It's like, if you get to the point where you're aware enough of, you don't want to sabotage you want to eat to avoid being lethargic. And I think that, you know, coming out of this last prep, you know, for I think both of us, I think we'd both said, you know, I just want to feel like I have some life back, you know, rather than go out and eat a meal. And, you know, you kind of have that, there's that, any digging phase, it's like best way I can describe it is like you're hungry for sure, that's kind of a given, but more so, it feels, for me, it just kind of feels like I have ankle weights on, you know, just like everything just feels, it's like the flu without like it's like the way you're just everything feels heavy, and you have to be very deliberate and kind of one foot in front of the other when it comes to training, and that part sucks because training, you know, something that I really love and enjoy kind of becomes a chore at that stage. And I think, you know, that's another thing, you know, for first-time competitors that I don't think we mentioned is, you know, strength is going to come down. And you have to get creative and figure out ways to. You get to the point where you're kind of the goal is sort of stimulating the muscle, and rather than using load and performance is the best metric for how you're doing. And that I think that phase is shorter than most people probably think. But you know, it's you have to get creative. You know, swap out movements. I know with James, like you get to a point, I think most competitors that have gotten like peeled have seen this. It's like you get to a point where squatting it's not like the return on investment for a back squat is pretty low when you're in contest shape. So, or can be often. And so it's like, how can we better train that musculature in an efficient manner where I'm providing the tension to just hold on to that muscle, you know. You have to sort of shift your mentality on how you approach training, and you still want to treat it like treat yourself as an athlete, but like you can get pretty ugly with technique and retain performance on paper. So you want to hold yourself to a high standard on the technical side, so you're not cheating yourself there.
I feel that with your training when you're prepping, you can kind of, because you can get away with so much when you're overfed, but once you're dieting, it shows you how much your system made sense. If you're having like huge issues trying to keep up with your off-season training when you are, like 2 months into your prep, chances are you need to go back and revise that, because it should be, it's going to, over time, you're going to change and adjust, based on how you're feeling. But, you can probably kick off with something very similar to start. And again, it's going to be like cardio's added. And it's kind of at the same pace we're adjusting training. So to me, that was like my first epiphany during my first prep. I remember I'm like, wow, like I'm doing way too much and so many things wrong when I'm eating enough food, and it's just that I can get away with it. Maybe we need to go back and rethink how we do things.
Yeah, and I think on the technical side, like technique too, there's the margin for error is much smaller. And I was dumb enough to try to do a meet, halfway. It was probably 2/3 of the way through prep, and I'm glad I did it because it was a good experience, but it didn't feel good, It was not. It was cool for pictures, but that's about it. But I think a lot of people too, performance across multiple sets, like that's a good. It's probably the best metric we have for, or quantifiable piece of data we have for muscle retention. But there's caveats to that, because at some point you expect that to come down, and you look at, it's important, as a coach and an athlete, to understand what contributes to performance, like in the acute sense. And there's nutrition pre and post, workout. Are you actually fueled enough? Do you have enough muscle glycogen to fuel your training? Then there's skeletal muscle. It's like, are you losing muscle to the point where you're compromising force production? And really, you shouldn't. If you're doing things right and you're losing at a slow enough rate, that shouldn't be a variable until like late, if at all. The vast majority of it's going to come from like just changes in mechanical levers. And when the lift becomes less mechanically efficient, all of a sudden load on the bar is going to take a huge hit. But that's not necessarily indicative of muscle loss. And I think that's important to realize, because you don't like pull the chute on whatever strategy you have in place. You just realize, okay, one way to think of it is, I'm now able to get the job done with less weight, because you're still challenging that musculature in a similar manner. But there's also movements that you just don't connect with. And squats, for me, and James is a good example, and that's one of them for a lot of people that I find I swap out just because leverages they just seem a little bit risky, I think, sometimes. As your waist gets smaller, you just have less. There's less. You're distributing force through a smaller area, and it can be a little bit problematic. But I think a lot of people, first-time competitors, they enter prep and they immediately assume, like, my strength is going to be less. And they just assume, like, the deficit is immediately going to have this acute impact on the way they can perform, and that's not the case. And it shouldn't be the case unless you're being way too aggressive. And so... tools you can use, isolation movements are a great way to, something that's low skill.
You can misgroove a leg extension,
look at things like that. Look at where you're at, kind of have that flow chart, like, what could be the explanation for this performance?
Because it freaks people out the first few times,
And that oftentimes requires, these large refeeds that aren't justified, or they get discouraged, they binge, or it's terminated, something else perhaps. And so I think knowing what to look for in terms of performance and knowing those explanations for those decrements in performance goes a long way. And I think same thing with diet. For me, I guess, as a coach and an athlete, I just like understanding and having my clients understand the rationale and the troubleshooting, if I'm, based on the information they provide me, I'm trying to explain to them along the way. It's like, okay, based off of this is why this is not a concern,
Well, the more, there's just going to be less of a chance that you make a decision based off like some emotional impulse if you're well informed and you can really rationalize everything in your head. And even then it's still difficult. Like we still have our moments even though we know how stuff works for the most part, but being able to go back to that has made the experience so much more.
Yeah, and I think the more experienced you become, I guess the more stubborn you become in making adjustments. And that goes with training, that goes with dietary adjustments. I mean, everyone's probably heard, you want to lose between, that 0.5 to 1% body weight per week. But realize that's like a rough average. There's going to be weeks you may gain weight. And that doesn't mean you're in a like caloric energy surplus. You could still very well be losing body fat during that time. So it's like, be objective, and when that happens, it's like you see the weight come up, you're like, that's interesting. You just like kind of you think back, you're like, okay, am I sore? How's my digestion? How's my hydration? Where's sodium? It's like there's tons of factors that contribute to that, and maybe give it a couple weeks, and if you're a female, you may need to have that time scale where you're comparing the same week 1 month versus the week the following month, and so you want to be comparing, you want to be looking through a wide lens, as wide of a lens as possible, and comparing those time scales to one another, because the wider the time frame you're looking at, the more it's going to wash out those inconsistencies. So.
Now, one thing we keep saying is, the coach has, especially with new athletes, it's not just about getting it done, but also about educating along the way. With older competitors, people who've done it a few times. So, for example, Craig Toth, a friend of ours, and I've been coaching him for a few years now. He's got over 100 shows. Yeah. And with him, he's never asking questions. We're not really getting into why we're doing things. It's just here. You take care of, I'm outsourcing the responsibility to you, and I'll just do what you think is best. And we leave it at that. And I think that's fine and appropriate. But, if you decide to have someone outsource your training, you're like, good, because I don't want to think about this. Just throw it at me. And that's kind of how we have it. But with someone who is brand new, you need to educate them. That's key. But we can only do it, right, if the athlete, is actually in search of that, and they allow you by doing their part and setting the tone when it comes to having that sort of communication. So the coach-athlete relationship, you're a first-time prepper, and you hired a coach, which I think we both agree that you absolutely should. What is, I guess, the more ideal dynamic for you between a first-time contest prepper and you as a coach? So what do you like to see on their part?
Yeah, I mean, I guess usually I have a pretty good idea. If I have a first-time competitor that doesn't, during the kind of the feeling out process before we actually are formally working together, if I don't get a read that they're, I guess, for lack of better words, coachable, within the confines of okay, do you want to learn, or are you just give me the plan so I can get shredded so I can post on Instagram, it's that's not going to be a recipe for success. And I think, some of that is just my preference as a coach, the type of athlete, that I want to work with. And I think part of that is just important just for success in general. Like you said, not everybody needs to be interested in the whys, but they need to have a baseline understanding, a foundation that they can fall back on when they need to be objective. But to answer your question, things that you want the athlete to communicate to you, you know, on a week-to-week basis, or, you know, whenever you, however often your check-ins are, you know, how they perceive themselves, you know, what their mental outlook is, you know, on their body image. And you don't expect it to all be good. You know, you don't,
exactly. No, not at all.
Yeah. You expect, you want to be realistic. So it's not a red flag necessarily. You just want to know where they're at compared to, you know, you kind of, as a coach, you sort of have these thresholds, you know, where, you know, you raise an alarm, you know, when certain things occur, you know, within there's some leeway there of, I guess, disordered behavior that comes along with contest prep. But, you know, I think, you know, how they're feeling, their body image, their food focus is a huge one. That's something that it can be hard to fix for people. You try to get them to focus on things that are more important, that are actually within their control. And I think patience goes, you know, hand in hand with that. You know, hormonally, how they're feeling.
Which can be hard to talk about.
Yeah, which can be awkward to talk about. It's not something you have to ask them about every single week, but, you know, just like, where is, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 5 being average, you know, where is your libido compared to where it is?
Can you make a sundial in the morning?
But that goes along. And again, it's like, if you get an unfavorable response there, it's not necessarily that things are going wrong, because some of that's expected. But if you're like early in the stages of fat loss and they're still more or less at their set point, it's like something's up. And so you have to have, you know, put their answer within the context of the timeline that you're operating within. So, you know, performance in the gym is a big one. Are they enjoying training?
Yeah.
You know,
are you
where?
enjoying it?
Overall, are you enjoying it? You know, where is stress? I mean, stress is a big one that you definitely want to communicate with your coach, is because that in itself can really cloud some of the fat loss that could be occurring.
And also, you might even change the course, especially if you have enough time, and they're like, these next 2 weeks are going to be crazy in regards to this. You might make some adjustments where, you know, instead of maybe refeeding twice a week, we refeed 3 times a week, 4 times, you know. So it's good to know that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And, it's like it kind of goes into diet periodization, and that's a totally other topic. But, they go hand in hand for sure. But in addition to, just water retention, you know, just where is your stress compared to baseline, and that provides that information to fall back on when you kind of troubleshoot, and you're saying, okay, what could be a confounding variable here? Let's see, what else?
I feel like I need to be their friend.
I mean, you have to kind of, as part of it's, I mean, we're not counselors, but you have to be empathetic.
Because at this point, like, when you get to a certain point in the prep, I mean, you might have the most understanding, supportive people around you, but you're really not going to have, unless you're lucky and you just live around that, you're not going to have people who understand. Especially your first time. Like, you and I, we don't need people to understand no more. We've done this enough. But your first time, it's really nice to have someone who doesn't think you're absolutely nuts and can explain to you, you know, why this is going on. And you need to build, I think, that bridge. And it's important to set the tone for that before we get into, you know, those wacky places in a contest prep. It's important to set that tone early, I feel.
Yeah, you know, being an outlet for them is huge. What did I mention already? So
the training,
stress, compliance. You want to be very, very transparent with your coach.
You don't expect perfection either. That's the thing.
Yeah, you don't expect perfection, but this is something that, I mean, it seems sort of, for some people, silly to even for us to bring up. It's like, if someone's prepping and they're paying, you know, a coach.
They haven't prepped, that's why.
Yeah, why would they cheat on their diet? And be transparent, realize, like, own up to when you make mistakes. Because if you don't, it's just going to result in frustration, and it can sabotage your long-term plan if the coach is making adjustments based off the assumption that you're compliant when you're not being compliant.
Or you try. Sometimes I've had happy people adjust and make up for it without telling me. It's like, well, I'm just going to write the numbers that were given, and I mess up here, and then I'm just going to make up for it. And I get the pictures. I'm like, you look horrible. Don't
tell them they look horrible. But it's true though. You want to. You need to be compliant, and you need to, but mistakes happen to everybody. I should say the vast majority, and you just need to own up to them when they happen. Realize that if you gave yourself a timeline that you should give yourself, it's probably not going to derail you. And it's something that is a first-time competitor, I think can be especially traumatic. It's like if you cheat on your diet, you're like, oh my God, like I'm gonna let them down. I'm letting my coach down. I'm letting my friends down. This is embarrassing. It's it can. You start to worry about what other people think. Of am I going to? I've already compromised all these social relationships for something that I'm not even going to see through, and so it can cascade and snowball into something bigger than it needs to be. So
you got to be compliant about the one thing we do expect is just like being honest about what is actually going on. We don't expect perfection, but like tell us even a little bit more than you think you should, I feel is absolutely safe.
I think joint another one just more related to training, like how your joints are feeling. Connective tissue integrity you just feel less, your joints can just feel a little bit more fragile. The leaner you get,
sometimes things that hurt, like, they kind of go off and on in the off season. Don't they hurt more when you're prepping? Like that old knee that bothers you comes back.
And then one thing, more training logistically is obviously, high reps aren't more beneficial for, burning fat and getting shredded, but
they sculpt.
But prep can be a good situation to kind of, we know you can grow and retain muscle with, pretty much any rep range and intensity spectrum. So like use the, if you're prepping yourself, which if you're a first-time competitor, hopefully you're not, but, as a coach, it's like you need to understand what's in your toolbox to navigate through that. And higher rep ranges can be beneficial in that regard. It can be beneficial in the regard that like each additional rep is less, like you can hang on to performance on paper a bit longer with higher reps. And I think that can be helpful for people. And I think the biggest thing is when you're leaner, higher reps too. It's like it's hard when you're lean to get a pump anyway. And those higher reps, they can give you that like psychological boost a little bit. Rather than doing like sets of 5 when you're flat. It's like it can kind of make you feel a little bit more alive.
So you just got your ass kicked, and you're still flat.
You still look like shit. So I think just knowing the benefits of more submaximal intensities and their versatility within a program can be beneficial.
So with high reps, I like how it's you have to be patient when you're progressing. Like you get a rep here, a rep there, but then also as you're regressing, it's kind of the same thing. It's like it's because at some point you're just trying to slow down regression in a prep. And it just allows you to kind of work backwards the same way you moved forwards. Exactly. Whereas like with a heavy set, it's like, shoot, a heavy set of 6 sometimes, you're like, I got 4 reps. This is supposed to be, you just lost a good chunk of your volume.
If nothing else, the psychological component of that is helpful.
Because it's still not, even if you understand why, it's still not easy to see yourself not be as strong as you were at some point,
Yeah, and I think, just personal experience. I tend to gravitate more towards machines. I think the leaner I get. And some of that I think is probably laziness, like getting into position with dumbbells and free weights. But sometimes it's just easier to connect. Like I said, you go through that stage at the end where it's just, I need to throw some, in those digging phases, like I need to just throw some stimulus, that direction to maintain what I have. And so you're kind of clinging on in those cases. And I think machines can be extremely useful in that regard.
So I guess, next year a lot of people are going to get up on that stage who've never done it before. Guess if there was like closing remarks, closing bits of advice. How many, do you prep 3 times now?
Yeah. So I've done, and each one's gotten easier, and I've gotten in better shape each time. So that should be encouraging to hear. So I think you refine your process. Don't expect perfection from yourself.
Yeah. How fun would it be if you peaked out after your first season, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If you get in shape your first season, you're doing it wrong. But no, the process is going to get easier every time you do it, or on average it will. But I would say, give yourself plenty of time. Hopefully if you're prepping in 2019, it's already on your radar now. If it's not, then I would, unless you're already in very good shape, I would consider, an honest assessment, talk to somebody who's been doing this a while, see, what they think of where you're at, maybe consider, pushing it off, and, sort of take a inventory of your life and see kind of, what am I in a place where I can do this successfully, and have it be something that I want to do again. And if you are, then it can be an extremely rewarding process. But it takes a tremendous amount of work. It's a blast. But it's, I tell this to all of my athletes, bodybuilders and powerlifters. It's like you have the 3 things in your control the most are, your training, your nutrition, and your sleep. And it's like all we can do at the end of each day is like win these small battles. And so you want to stay very process oriented, as each day progresses. You want to win each day. Basically go to bed knowing that you won the day, and then the next day you'll just kind of build on that. And all of these small challenges are all doable in isolation. So treat each one individually rather than looking at it through a wide lens and thinking like, this is me now and I need to get there. That's going to be daunting. So as long as you have the timeline, and that's why time is so important. It's like, give yourself the timeline where you can focus on those small details and, or those small victories instead of the big picture, and the big picture will just take care of itself. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of go wrong, is they spend less time in the present and they focus more on the future. And people get in, it's just a product of just tons of good decisions, I guess.
No, I'm a piggyback off that. And bodybuilding goals they're a good way to get good at the really important stuff, because they're about 6-8 months. Where you want to be, you kind of disassemble the plan, and like you said, you take it day by day. And I think what has really helped me get through preps, and I mentioned today in my story, sometimes just getting through today instead of worrying about the future. I'm going to get to today's training session and we're going to have a training session, or sometimes just getting through the next 2 hours. You might be at a family function and it's one of those that you don't look forward to. You're like, I'm going to do this, and the days of success. So it's all those little things that will eventually get you to your big goal. And sometimes it's, instead of being too caught up and worried about the future, is just like, hey, it'll probably all work out if we just really zone in on what we have right now and just take care of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true for anything.
Yeah.
And it's those moments, I think, where those stages where it's one foot in front of the other. It's like those are the ones you look back on and, you're proud. You're proud that you got through it. And it serves as a, kind of fortifies your ability to deal with stuff, that's much more important.
Way more important. Yeah. Well, but it's a good way to get your training wheels for sure. So, anyhow, for those of you who are competing in 2019, wishing you guys the best. There's a lot of great coaches out there. So please do yourself a favor and get yourself one of those, including my boy right here, Brian. So with that said, we'll leave it here, 3DMJers, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Helms. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. As you know, at 3DMJ, we promote evidence-based approaches to the lifting community. If that's something you want to dive deeper into, I'd encourage you to check out my research review, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, or for short, MASS. This is a review that myself, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Greg Knuckles put out every month. We cover the latest research publications that are applicable to strength and physique athletes, or anyone who's looking to get stronger or improve their body comp. Our content is in both written and video format. For more information on how to subscribe, check out 3dmusclejourney.com/mass. That's 3dmusclejourney.com/MASS for further details. Thanks for tuning in.